Today, it marks an auspicious anniversary. Or maybe not auspicious. Maybe the better word is tragic anniversary. You see, today is the 12th anniversary of a day that will probably live in infamy in the history of the church. Catholic Set gives us this blast from the past. On this day, 12 years ago, and then a bunch of Latin, but I'm going to highlight here Cardinal Bergoglio. Yes, 12 years ago, today is the day Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio emerged on the loggia after the conclave, dressed in white, and was introduced to the world as Pope Francis. 12 years ago today. And that's why it's fitting that these stories that we now have in the Catholic media about Cardinal McElroy and just how much no one in the hierarchy seems to care about his past are appropriate to talk about. Yesterday on this channel, we talked about the installation of Cardinal Robert McElroy, who has been a very good foot soldier for the modernist movement in the church. He was installed as the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C., because he has been an outspoken proponent of unfettered migration into the United States and has been an outspoken critic of the new administration's program for restoring societal stability and security on that issue. McElroy has also been a vocal ally of Father James Martin, S.J., and that sin that Father James Martin has a weird and unhealthy interest in for a Catholic priest. Yes, McElroy embraces the spirit of the age on that issue and on a lot of others. And McElroy wants to, at least in practice, toss the church's timeless teaching on Catholic morality in the trash. In practice, go back to Fiducia Supplicans. The document opens up, reiterating what the church is teaching on that weird sin James Martin has such a weird interest in. Before then, in practice, telling priests to ignore it. In practice, telling people, the priests, to toss Catholic morality out the window and come up with some sort of halfway play footsie with the world on the issue while not quite fully embracing it, because we're doing incrementalism and gradualism here for changing Catholic morality. But most notoriously, and not surprising in the slightest, McElroy has, for his entire episcopal career, been at the center of bishops sweeping away the crisis of evil priests doing generally unspeakably evil things to women and the most young, things that Ted McCarrick and Marcel Maciel did in the church. And we covered some of the most credible accusations against him yesterday here, and in more detail than I normally go into, to the point that people were generally some people were quite shocked at it. Again, I didn't want to go into that kind of detail, but it was impossible not to understand the gravity of what we're talking about here and the absolute state of the church. So remember what he did, what he hid away. As you see, the bishops of the church rally around him. The Catholic media, including outlets that had otherwise been generally trustworthy to give you at least a straight telling of what's happening in the church, they rallied around him too. After yesterday's live stream and having to go into more detail than I ever normally would, I was actually nauseated from having to talk about all that stuff. It was disturbing. And as a rule, I don't cover accusations of that kind about priests if the accusations are ongoing and if the process related to it is ongoing. Because if you want to destroy a priest forever, accuse him of the McCarrick Maciel kind of stuff. There's simply no recovering from it for a priest. But if the issue has been adjudicated, meaning it's gone through the secular or canonical legal process, and if that process has been fair, and if it turns out the accusations are true and credible, then yeah, I'll talk about him here. But as a general rule, I don't, because we already know that problem is enormous in the church. But there is a tendency of bishops to hide it. And what's maddening about that issue is that the U.S. bishops all know about McElroy hiding priests of that kind away. They all know, all of them. They all know about the confrontation between a woman who is the survivor of the evil actions of a priest that are so evil that the only person in the church like that priest that I'm aware of today is Father Marco Rupnik, if you're familiar with that story. He did the same thing to nuns that the woman I'm talking about who confronted Cardinal McElroy yesterday during the exit procession of his installation mass had done to her. Right down to the use of the mass as an implement in this. And McElroy swept it away. The bishops know about her, and more maddeningly still, so does the Catholic media. After all, one of the articles I brought you yesterday was from Crux, which is out of the Diocese of Boston. It's overseen by the Diocese of Boston. They know. The Catholic media knows. The secular media knows. And yes, all of them, yes, the bishops, the Catholic media, and the rest rallied around Cardinal Robert McElroy. No mention in the Catholic press of the confrontation I mentioned yesterday, which went viral on X before I covered it. And no mention of McElroy's troubled past. The information is all out there. It takes no time to find. They didn't do their jobs. I'm going to give you Exhibit A. Start with a pillar Catholic. They ought to be ashamed of themselves for their role in making a monster in a collar more palatable to the Catholic public. So we go here to a news outlet that gets lauded for being trustworthy. Headline: Have the U.S. bishops united behind McElroy? This sounds like it's an article about the backlash to Cardinal McElroy. It's not the way you're thinking it would be. What it is it's an article about McElroy, how he had taken the position to embrace the James Martin sin a couple of years ago and cast aside church teaching on that in practice, and the responses he got from the bishops at that time. That was pushback. If you're going to wonder how this changed, this article goes into it. It gives you an important detail, the context of why they're rallying around him. And many of you will know why they're rallying around him. Put in the live chat if you're watching this live, or in the comments if you've gotten to this point, what you think the reason they rallied around him is. It's the most cynical reason of all. Quote: The installation of Cardinal Robert McElroy as the 8th Archbishop of Washington went off with a bang on Tuesday. The Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception was full, and the entrance processional snaked around the nave as thousands of Catholics and hundreds of clerics from across the country arrived in fleets of buses to see the Cardinal take possession of the capital see. While Episcopal installations in Washington tend to draw a full house, McElroy's arrival was especially well attended. More than 80 bishops, archbishops, and cardinals celebrated. Dozens more came Tuesday than the last time such an event was held, when Cardinal Wilton Gregory was installed in 2019. The crowd was about as Catholic representation as could be imagined, with bishops visible from nearly every state between McElroy's previous posting in California and D.C. It's a rare event that brings together bishops from New Mexico, Washington State, Illinois, and New York. Indeed, the March 11th liturgy felt better attended than many sessions of USCCB plenary meetings. And it was clear that the bishops were happy to be there. The smiles were everywhere and evidently sincere. Cardinal Timothy Dolan affectionately bear-hugged Cardinal Blaise Cupich in the processional line. For those of you who think Cardinal Dolan could be a great pope as a moderate, there he is. There's your moderate. Given the tensions and divisions which so visibly split the conference in recent years, and which Cardinal McElroy was often a visible figure, there was an almost ecumenical air to the occasion. When McElroy was announced as the next Washington Archbishop in January, many worried he could prove a divisive figure. Instead, on today's showing, at least he has emerged as perhaps an unlikely point of unity among the bishops. By itself, there's nothing unusual about a major archiepiscopal installation drawing a big crowd, perhaps even more so in Washington, given its place on the national stage. But by any metric, including compared to the historic inauguration of D.C.'s first black archbishop 6 years ago, Cardinal McElroy's brother bishops turned out in force, and from all corners of what are often considered to be the ideological spectrum of the conference. Attendance might well have been buoyed by the installation's overlap with a meeting of the USCCB's Administrative Committee in Washington this week. But nonetheless, it was only 2 years ago that the bishops were arguing angrily and publicly over the theology of the Eucharist. And here's where they talk about how they've rallied around him in the divisiveness that they pushed back on against him in the past. And now they're rallying around him. No mention here, none, of the great evil the church has been fighting in America, Ireland, Western Europe, the Americas, everywhere but basically Africa, and his role in hiding things. In February 2023, Cardinal McElroy wrote that the church should discard, quote, a theology of Eucharistic coherence that multiplies barriers to the grace and gift of the Eucharist. Unworthiness cannot be the prism of accompaniment for disciples of the God of grace and mercy, the Cardinal said in an essay. McElroy was arguing for opening the Eucharist up to people who are barred from receiving it because of sin. Categorically rejecting the church's teaching on that. He is a heretic. In response, Bishop Thomas Paprocki of Springfield warned that clarifying doctrinal errors proffered by senior church leaders is a, quote, necessary responsibility for bishops, and that failing to address errors in Catholic teaching would see them compounded. In an article of his own linking to McElroy's text, Paprocki set out to, quote, explore some of the canonical implications if you have a situation of a cardinal who is holding to heretical views or publicly proclaiming and teaching heretical views. So we here have a bishop who acknowledged, without quite explicitly saying Cardinal McElroy is a heretic, without explicitly saying that, he acknowledged that McElroy was a heretic. And then this happens. While Paprocki stressed in comments to the Pillar at the time that he was not offering a particular personal assessment of any single bishop or cardinal, he noted that he would certainly welcome those kinds of conversations with Cardinal McElroy or any bishop. With that kind of history, Paprocki's own attendance at McElroy's installation on Tuesday was a silent statement which might be seen to speak volumes about how far the bishops have come and how quickly towards forming a visibly more united front. Paprocki stepped back from his declaring Cardinal McElroy a heretic, united with a heretic. Here's why. A few reasons here. Part of the groundwork for this renewed sense of conference collegiality likely comes in part from the bishops choosing to change how to speak and relate to each other. One of the more notable changes to come out of the 2023 Eucharistic coherence debates was a shift for much more of the business at USCCB meetings be conducted behind closed doors. Since then, bishops have routinely spoken about a renewed sense of fraternity and how they have found it easier to be charitably frank with each, having moved their conversations behind closed doors. And with very few exceptions, there have been a generally undertaking to keep their conversations confidential, even while they discuss potentially divisive issues like reforms to the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, one of the biggest fundraisers in the church. And it gets worse. Of course, this renewed sense of collegiality didn't erase entirely different viewpoints among the bishops, nor did it signal an end to sometimes contentious discussions about episcopal appointments, both in the U.S. and in Rome. Indeed, lengthy delays in major appointments often found McElroy's name mixed up in the process, though by no means always at his own instigation. Even as recently as this year, when the choice for Washington was announced, McElroy's appointment was reportedly the result of a closely contested back-and-forth process, drawing in voices from multiple U.S. cardinals. Yet if McElroy's unveiling for Washington was reportedly a pointed papal response to political developments following the November election, it may be that those same secular politics have helped rally the bishops behind the cardinal. They put him there to own Trump, to dunk on Donald Trump. Amazing. Since Inauguration Day in January, the Trump administration has staked out a number of positions at odds with church authorities, both in rhetorical terms and on the substance of policy. The USCCB is currently suing the administration over the suspension and then termination of contracts to provide resettlement services for refugees to the United States and seeking to recoup tens of millions of dollars in back payments owed by the government. At the same time, Catholic Vice President J.D. Vance publicly accused the bishops of taking on refugee work to pad their bottom line, despite the conference spending more annually on such programs than it received in government funds for doing so. And that's carefully worded, government funds. They get their money for this from several sources. Money directly from the government and direct grants awarded by the government to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops or to Catholic charities and organizations like them. They also all will get their money from other non-governmental organizations, other nonprofits who contract work from the government and then subcontract it out. That is where they get their money from. They might spend more than they do on their government contract, meaning their direct government contract, but there is money for those programs coming from other sources as well that are usually traced back to the government. That is how this works. It's not inaccurate to say that they're padding their bottom line that way because J.D. Vance knows how this works. He's a senator, after all, was. The adoption by the Trump administration of a strident posture towards the USCCB and Catholic charities, characterized as overtly hostile by some observers, has provoked near universal criticism from bishops, who have both sought to defend the church's charitable works and accommodate deep cuts to staff following the cancellation of contracts. Any of these circumstances would probably be enough to cause a renewed sense of solidarity among the bishops, but the health of Pope Francis has likely made the episcopal instinct to pull together even stronger. Last month, the Pope issued a letter to all the American bishops, praising them for their principled and invaluable efforts in working with refugees and migrants in the face of the, quote, major crisis that is taking place in the United States with the initiation of a program of large-scale removal. Just days later, the Pope was taken to the hospital, where he has faced several moments of critical risk to his life and where he remains making slow progress towards recovery, providing the U.S. bishops, together with all Catholics, with another point of urgent unity as they pray for his recovery, with Cardinal McElroy leading them in a recitation of a rosary decade for Francis's intentions at the end of Mass on Tuesday. It's politics. It's money. That's why they're rallying around him. Note the cardinal or the bishop who correctly pointed out that McElroy's position was heretical is now rallying behind him. It's money. It's politics. It's money. All that is more important than the gospel for a lot of them. Now, notice there was only 80 of them there, and there's like over 400 bishops in the United States. So a fair number of them weren't there, but all the key players were, and some who would surprise you were there. But they rally around him because he has become the point man for resisting the Trump administration on cuts to Catholic charities, on cuts from USAID and other funding mechanisms in the bureaucracy, because there are organizations or funding lines in virtually every branch of the federal bureaucracy that offer funds for wicked and weird purposes like USAID. McElroy is the point person for keeping the migration grift going. That's what this is about. And just a reminder, I've said this before, and I will say it again here. If there is a papal conclave in the coming months, which may be likely, then that issue, U.S. government tax funding of church operations, will be front and center at the conclave. Liz Yore has estimated it's 80% of the funding of the Vatican comes from non-governmental organizations from the U.S. government and European governments. I think that might be a little high, personally. But even if it's 50%, 40%, that is a staggering amount of money. This is going to loom large at that conclave if one happens here. See, the rest of the Pillar article makes no mention whatsoever of McElroy's evil history of hiding satanic priests in the church. That says volumes about the credibility of the Pillar. I hope they get a lot of pushback for this and that they're forced to respond, because at the end of the day, McElroy is a message on a whole lot of levels about their priorities, which include how they're not really taking the issue seriously of evil men in the priesthood doing unspeakable things to people who are vulnerable to them. And I'm not the only one saying this. Moderate Catholics will probably take this more seriously than, what I'm saying. This is from, if it ever pop up here, doesn't seem to want to. Let's try this again. There it is. This is from Dr. Peter Kwasniewski's Facebook page. He says, to the extent that the Pillar's take is correct, it is something to lament, not something to celebrate. The smiles and bear hugs point to the perdurance of the old boys club. If you ever want a picture of what clericalism looks like, ladies and gentlemen, this is what clericalism looks like. It's Cardinal Supich being given a bear hug by Cardinal Dolan at the installation mass for Cardinal Robert McElroy. That's what that looks like. The National Catholic Register, which is the print arm of EWTN, an outlet many of you trust, celebrated McElroy as well. They celebrated him partially through omission. Headline: Cardinal McElroy stresses hope, mercy, human dignity as new Washington Archbishop. Cardinal McElroy highlights Christian hope and compassion in his first homily, stressing care for the most vulnerable and unity in a fractured society. How nice. Wonderful, EWTN. What a wonderful thing. That article makes no mention of Robert McElroy's wicked past either. That article makes no mention of the confrontation between Rachel Mastrogiacomo and Cardinal McElroy during the exit processional for his Mass. Mass had technically ended. Yes, many of you corrected what I said. Yes, I said it happened during the Mass. It happened during the exit processional at the conclusion of the Mass. No mention of this. No one is mentioning it. The video footage went viral before I went live with it yesterday. No mention. In fact, this is so systematic in the Catholic media that it took a Catholic blogger to point out how widespread this issue actually is. So we're going to go to the Substack blog called the John 1837 blog, by Jean Thomas Gomolka. The headline is Fake News Outlets Cover for McElroy. Victims and advocates betrayed by church leaders and the media. Betrayed is putting it nicely. They are promoting an alternative reality. They're covering for men who have no regard for the truth, for decency, or for, frankly, what the state of the church actually is. You saw potentially 1 in 5 of the U.S. bishops stand with McElroy, including all the highest profile ones, including ones who stood against him before. And then how many of the rest who couldn't be there because they had duties in their diocese called him or sent him a message or an email or something congratulating him on his installation? Here is the important part of this blog piece, because I just went over the pillar with you and he talks what starts with the pillar. But let's go with what this blogger had to say. Everything here is on point. Quote, the pillar, along with the legacy in Catholic media, would like people to believe that the shrine was packed with clergy and laity for McElroy's installation. They did so by showing photos and video, only from the very front of the shrine. This reminds me of how Pope Francis altered a letter by Pope Benedict for an anniversary booklet that misled readers to believe that Benedict was supportive of Francis's pontificate. Benedict began the letter by identifying some accomplishments he supported, but then listed a number of changes that Francis made of which he strongly disapproved. The deceptively cropped letter was no different than the photos and videos of the shrine event. This is a photo during the ceremony that paints a very different picture of the event. They made it sound like the place was packed. That wasn't packed. In fact, I would actually dare to say to somebody I don't respect at all politically, because he's turned out to be really fake, and because he's a left-wing loon, but Bernie Sanders has been holding his rallies, his counter rallies to the stuff that Elon Musk is doing, and he's getting bigger crowds than this. And this is bishops of the church could not actually get Catholics to come out, even though the pillar made it sound like they could. These empty pews tell you the truth. Compare this to the pictures that they're showing here, like this one in the media. Why do media sources hide the dramatic decline in U.S. Catholic membership, with only 19% of Americans self-identifying as Catholic? According to the Center for Catholic Studies, a third of Catholics who previously went to Mass stopped going as a result of the Maciel Ted McCarrick crisis in the Catholic Church. Studies revealed today that Sunday Mass attendance has increased between 21 and 24%. Why did the Washington Post, Catholic news agency, National Catholic Reporter, and other news outlets not mention how McElroy hid away the satanic ritual evil deeds against Rachel Mastrogiacomo? Processing behind Cardinal McElroy at the installation Mass was Cardinal Christophe Pierre, the Apostolic Nuncio to the United States. Like McElroy, who failed to investigate and report the evil allegations involving 12 seminarians and priests he received from the late psychotherapist Richard Sipe, so too has Pierre failed to investigate similar allegations involving seminarians at St. John Paul II in Washington, D.C., and St. Mary's Seminary in Baltimore. Pierre also had hidden away such allegations that he is documented to have received at 10:35 p.m. on 30th of September 2024 from Lisa Rowers and Rachel Mastrogiacomo, captured in the video, The Prayer of the Pray. Link in that piece. All these articles I'm going over today will be at my show notes at returntotradition.org. Go check it out there. Our hosts have rules about posting links to places with ads on them, so my sources are all over there. Many people have watched this video, along with the video, The Problem in the Church, Code of Silence, realize that the Pope and his cardinals are not the saintly people that Catholics and non-Catholics have been led to believe. Just as the legacy in Catholic media failed in 2013 to report how Jorge Bergoglio hid away countless of these kinds of cases when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, despite having said, this problem never happened in my diocese, so too are they hiding away the abysmal evil reporting records of most of the cardinals who were present at McElroy's installation. In order to learn the truth about cardinals like Robert McElroy, Blaise Supich, Tim Dolan, Wilton Gregory, and Joseph Tobin, one has to go to complicit clergy to read Conclave. As an advocate for the people harmed by this and investigative reporter, I can't help but wonder, do the bishops and media not realize the harm they are causing thousands of those who survived this, many who struggle with depression, a problem with drink and other substances, and even remove themselves from this mortal coil as a result of allowing their pleas for help to be ignored and go unanswered? What really took place yesterday in D.C. is happening all over the U.S. Here's a photo of the most recent Christmas Mass in the Buffalo Cathedral that 20 years ago was overflowing with worshipers. Note that the celebrant, Buffalo Bishop Michael Fisher, hails from the Washington Archdiocese and was promoted by McCarrick, Worrell, and Gregory. That is a Christmas Mass. A Christmas Mass. Do you see this? There's nobody there. It's like 30 people there, if that. They're driving people out of the church with this. It's not just the politics. They're out in the open with this. They are driving people out of the church, and it looks like they don't care. I really want to use stronger language that I normally never would use on YouTube. I really want to drive the point home, how much they don't care about souls. The Catholic media is covering for McElroy. Even previously trusted Catholic media is covering for him. And why? Because of money, because of USAID and Catholic Charities funding, and the fact that McElroy is actually probably the sharpest intellect among them. And he is opposing what the administration is doing. Saying he's the sharpest intellect does not mean that I endorse anything he says. But when you read his articles, it's clear the man is intelligent, that he is a potent adversary of decency in the church. And they're rallying around him because they're trying to whip up Catholics and the broader public to put pressure on the administration to restore their funding. It's a full court systematic press to get their money back. That's what this is. Once you go down the rabbit hole of government funding of the institutions of the church, the worse the picture gets. The Catholic media wants to protect its access to bishops. That's why they don't call this out. The bishops rally around McElroy and, by extension, McCarrick, Maciel, and whoever else you care to name, whom McElroy was friends with. McCarrick, not Maciel, as far as I know. But he was friends with McCarrick because most of their funding comes from illicit government sources. That's why the bishops rally around him. He's going to try to keep them in business. That's his job. That is why it is right and just that you get worked up about this. But make sure you unite whatever it is you do in this with prayer. And if you communicate to your bishops about this, do so with respect to their office and with restraint. Calling them up and cursing them out over the phone is not going to help anything. Now, let's turn our attention to a relatively small news story that has some implications for those expecting a conclave or thinking that Francis has, for some reason, passed away. Don't believe everything you read online. There are people who tell you that Francis has been passed away and replaced by a Hollywood stunt double. Weird stuff. It's not true. But people are out there saying this weird stuff. The leaders of competing religions think Pope Francis is going to make a recovery. They believe he's going to make such a recovery that he is going to start traveling again soon. This is on the heels of recent announcements that he is recovering, making good progress on dealing with the pneumonia that he's been dealing with. They believe that he's going to make such a recovery that not only will he be traveling, they're actually starting to announce travel dates for him. Now, these are the people he would be going to visit. The Vatican themselves have not done this. But you have to remember, it's kind of a sort of an exclusive club being in the circle of world leaders. All you got to do is look at the reactions from like the EU and other governments to the stuff the new American president is saying and doing to realize it's kind of a big club and outsiders are not welcome into it. And I guarantee you, Pope Francis is part of that club. You can see it with the way they celebrate his encyclicals. You can see it in the way they welcome him like a celebrity rock star. All of this stuff. Even when he shows up in a place and the laity don't show up, which is kind of a giant red flag, they treat him like a rock star. The way the media treats him is another indication of this. But so they're privy to information that you and I may not be privy to most of the time. And so we're going to go here to a very strange story from katholisch.de. This is the official news arm of the German Bishops' Conference. And they give us this. Vatican. Pope's trip to Turkey never officially confirmed. published on the 12th of March, 2025. There's been talk that he was going to go visit the heads of the, he's going to visit the local Eastern Orthodox patriarch there. This has been in talk for some time. They are so confident that he's going to make a recovery that they are announcing his trip. That's a little weird. Again, the man, we were just informed a couple of days ago that he's back on solid foods after 3 weeks. He's 88 years old, dealing with 1.8 lungs and dealing with pneumonia. I'm not trying to be crass about this, I'm trying to be blunt. He is making good recovery now to the point where the doctors are now expressing optimism more openly. But this seems a little short-sighted, at least to me. What do I know? From the official news arm of the German bishops article on this, quote, "The Vatican has neither confirmed nor denied a trip by the Pope to Turkey for the end of May, announced in Istanbul by Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I." Bartholomew, by the way, is one of the Bergoglian types in the Eastern Orthodox Church. For those of you thinking about Orthodoxy, you're not going to escape heretic bishops by going there. It's not a big of a problem there. Bartholomew is a character. Vatican spokesman Matteo Bruni stated on Wednesday evening that the Holy See had never officially announced or confirmed the trip. However, the project is among the several plans that Francis would like to realize if possible, the spokesperson said. The occasion for the unconfirmed trip is the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. Today is Iznik near Istanbul. It was there in 325 that the creed, the Nicene Creed, was formulated, which is still valid for almost all Christian churches today. Last November, the Pope had already announced his intention to travel to Turkey for the anniversary. Patriarch Bartholomew and Pope Francis have long enjoyed a friendly relationship. Both address each other with the title brother. On Wednesday, Patriarch Bartholomew announced at a reception for a group that the German Association of the Holy Land in Istanbul that the planned meeting between him and Pope Francis would take place on May 26th. That gives them 3 full months to improve enough to do this, to do what would be a relatively short flight from Rome to Istanbul. But he hoped and prayed that the Pope would recover completely and be able to begin his journey. During the audience, the Patriarch also expressed his satisfaction with the progress of Catholic Orthodox dialogue. Of course, problems have accumulated over 1,000 years, but we are full of hope that they will be resolved in a few years, said the 84-year-old honorary head of World Orthodoxy. If you're an Eastern Orthodox watching this, let me know if you recognize him as the honorary head of World Orthodoxy, because my understanding is Eastern Orthodox, a lot of them don't like him very much at all. The 1700th anniversary of the First Ecumenical Council brings the churches back to a time of undivided Christianity, the Patriarch continued, also citing church historical research. This research supports his thesis that in 1054, the official separation of the churches, there was no schism between Rome and Constantinople. Instead, there were merely tensions that deepened over time. According to Bartholomew I, these are not insurmountable, end quote. Yeah, that's nonsense. There was a schism. The Eastern Orthodox that you argue with online will be happy to remind you that there was a schism. They will just tell you that it was Rome that went into a schism. And it's the Catholic position that it was the Orthodox who went into schism. And around we go for hundreds and hundreds of years on this issue. But for whatever reason, Patriarch Bartholomew is announcing that Francis is coming to Istanbul on May 26th. Normally, papal trips for these kind of things aren't that big of a deal, not even really worth talking about, except maybe in this case for the 1700th anniversary of the Nicene Creed and the Council of Nicaea. But Francis is getting assistance breathing. Now, it's not as bad as it was. I didn't give you an update today, but they gave you an update that's built on the previous one. The previous update said he was recovering and the doctors were more optimistic. And then they gave you another update last night saying basically the same thing. Why would Patriarch Bartholomew make such an announcement ahead of the Vatican? Now, I know why the Vatican would be reticent to do this. It's pretty obvious. They want people to be praying for Francis. They don't want to get people's hopes up. Yet the Orthodox are out there saying this is going to happen. What does Patriarch Bartholomew know that you and I don't know about this? My contention has been pretty standard throughout all of this, that he will make a recovery, but he should also be bracing for a conclave. It would be interesting if there was a conclave in May. I'm not saying I'm pining for his standing before our Lord. I want him to make a recovery and receive the graces he needs from God, so that when he does stand before our Lord, he does stand before him as a friend of God, as opposed to what he's been doing to the church. But what is it that they know that we don't? Let me know in the comments what you think about this. And hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Share this on social media if you can. That helps too. And pray for everybody we spoke about today. Not here to whip you up in anger towards Francis or anybody else we spoke about today. And as always, pray for the church, especially in this time of universal deceit in the church. Because right now, there are people who don't believe McElroy or Francis or any of them have done anything evil and that they deserve your loyalty. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.